Hello and welcome back to AP World History Modern. Today we're going to be looking at Unit 3.1. This is actually our third day, looking at land empires and expansion. And we're going to focus in on the Mughal governance. And specifically, we're going to be looking at some concepts from your reading and making some comparisons from that. All right, so our learning objective is to explain how and why various land-based empires developed, right, how they expanded, and of course, how they administered those large and diverse governments once they were in fact created. Okay. So we did a couple things with our daily five. I'm just going to show you one today. So feel free to read through this and answer the passage. All right, so hopefully after doing so, you came up with 2 as your correct answer. All right, and this is looking at Songhai in sub-Saharan West Africa. All right. All right, so like I said, we're going to be looking at the Mughal, and we're going to be making some comparisons with some of the concepts from your readings last night with the Ottomans and a little bit with the Safavid as well. So you have kind of traditional, sometimes referred to as gunpowder empires. All right, and specifically, we're going to be trying to match up some of these categories of analysis. All right, so I created some of these categories of analysis by themes. I went over them a video or two ago. So we're going to look at some of these concepts that we read about last night and how to put some categories of analysis. Like, for example, art and architecture to legitimize rule. So if we're looking at ways in which architecture was used to legitimize rule, here are some samples from each of the 3 empires that we're talking about. And so what we're really doing here is, let me pop up my thing. So I took I just took a piece of paper, I gridded it into 4 different grids. I took this from an idea I saw a few years ago as a way to study vocab. So today we're going to use it as a way to apply some of these categories of analysis. All right, so for example, category of analysis here would be, zoom in on this so you can see a little bit better. All right, so use of monumental architecture. All right, the use of monumental architecture to justify rule. Maybe a better way to say it is to demonstrate authority. All right, so if we were to break this down into Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal. All right. The image that I showed you had the Suleimani Mosque. Right, and we talked about that yesterday on the timeline. So that was created, in the kind of aftermath of the Anatolian revolts, right? In the Ottoman Empire. Right, so that's kind of one that you could use there. What else? Under the Safavid, I think I've got a couple here. I think what I pulled was the Latofola Mosque, which is kind of part of this larger complex. So let me write this down. And then I think the image I have there is the Latofola Mosque. And I've got a couple Mughal examples of architecture here. One would be the Red Fort. Another would be I have the shot of the interior of the Shah Jahan Mosque. Right, and then the Taj Mahal. Right, so looking at these, right, looking at these three, right, now once you're kind of looking at them, right, so these are our samples of each of the three, right, how can we make a comparison? Make a comparison. So what are some similarity comparisons you could make using this? Or what are some difference comparisons you could use? All right, so the interior, your essential things, use of geometric designs, use of calligraphy to for the to write passages from the Quran, right? Would be some good similarities. Also, use of dome architecture, right? You are seeing in these. You do also see millets in a couple of them on the exteriors. Yeah. So, so there's some similarity comparisons here that you could kind of easily make to demonstrate some comparisons. All right. So that's kind of what we're doing. And what I'd done is I'd written down a couple of the vocab concepts from last night's homework, like for example, the house of worship. So this is Akbar. Right, so this is Akbar bringing together religious and spiritual leaders from different faiths. So Hindu, some Bhakti Hindu, some Christians, specifically Jesuits, representing Roman Catholicism during the late 1500s. And we'll talk about Jesuits when we get to Unit 3.3. Islam, a lot of Sufi influence at this time, Zoroastrian, Persian. All right. So, and the ideal here is the house of worship is to promote religious unity, right, and in dialogue between the different religions. And we see this policy of accommodation. Right. So, what is what would be an example of a comparison we can make in one of the other empires? All right. So, how about in the Ottoman? All right. So, in the Ottoman Empire, a comparison could be made to the millet system. Okay, to the millet system within this, and and when you're looking at what some of this is, you do have what the millet system is. We see some autonomy, right? Some autonomy. Oops, that's an N. Some autonomy over local issues. All right, so this is religious autonomy over local issues. And what kind of things like marriage, burial, that kind of stuff. All right, these are groups that would fall into the category of having dhimmi status. Right, so these are groups that would have had dhimmi status, and of course, as as part of this, they would have also, right, and this is kind of a throughout the Ottoman period, you would have seen the jizya, right, the jizya being a part of this. And of course, one of the concepts that we talked about with the Ottomans would be the devshirm, right? So an Ottoman specific kind of jizya, right? So a blood tax, right, within that. Right, so if we were to make our comparisons, just using these, you can see some similarity comparisons. We can also see some difference comparisons. Like for example, with the jizya would be a difference comparison. And then of course, how would you come up with a category of analysis for this? Right. So what I'm really trying to get in here is not like the vocab word. I'm really looking for thesis writing. So what's one way you could do this? So when we talk about a category of analysis, we're looking for that in between a fact and the theme that it would go under. So this is like our kind of a cultural theme. Maybe a good category of analysis would be policies. Right, policies of religious toleration. Right, policies of religious toleration. All right. and maybe we'll do a third one later on. All right. All right, so let's go to another example from your homework last night. So Nur Jahan, all right, so this is another Mughal example. So this is the 20th wife, and your textbook does not give you the name Jahangir, it just says the 20th wife of the Sultan who followed Akbar. Right, so in this case here, it's Jahangir. So what do we know about her? We know that she travels around the empire with her husband. We know her husband was an alcoholic, which opens the door for her to have some authority and decision-making abilities. And of course, alcohol, just so that we know this is something that is being brought in by merchants, specifically European merchants. Right, and we also know that she can add a few things to this. Right, and I lost my color that I was working with. All right, so what do we know about her? Right, we know that she issues decrees. Right, she issues decrees, so she's in a position of authority. Right, and I guess a fun fact about her might be coins. Right, coins were minted bearing her name. Right, so highly unusual, right? Given this. All right, so what category of analysis are we talking about? The category of analysis, and maybe you could look at it as and you can kind of pause if you want to go back and look at these different categories of analysis and see where she falls. All right, so let's go ahead and bring this back. All right, so maybe something like increased role of women in palace politics. All right, so that might be a way you could describe that. So what would be a similarity comparison with something from the Ottoman Empire, something from yesterday's vocabs, yesterday's words. All right, so from the Ottoman, we have the Sultanate. Right, the Sultanate of women would be one of these examples, right, from the Ottoman Empire. Right? This would be a similarity comparison. All right, so what are we talking about here? It's more of a general thing. I mean, you can get into the specifics about some of the wives of Suleiman specifically, because this is where this generally derives from. Okay. So, but we generally break down this influence into two different categories. Right, the Sikhi sultans, and this is referring to the wives. Right, the wives of the sultans. And then the second, this would be taking place within the palace itself. Right, and then we have the Validi sultans. Right, and this is referencing to the mothers of sultans having influence on their sons, and not an uncommon practice within the Ottoman Empire for the boys once they reach the age of maturity, they'll kind of be taken out of the harems in Istanbul and then brought to the outer provinces of the Ottoman Empire to be raised into adulthood, and then their mothers would have an increasing level of influence over their child as they kind of go through their teenage years. All right, so with all this said, think about comparisons you could make, right? So similarity or difference comparisons. All right, another concept from last night would be your Zamanders. All right, so once again, Zamanders are Mughal, right? Zamanders are Mughal, and this is referencing landowners. Right, this is referencing landowners who collect taxes right? Collect taxes for the Mughal emperor. Okay, and and this really begins in earnest under Akbar. Right? This really begins in earnest under Akbar. Let me zoom that in so everyone can see. And I'm going to take a break just for 1 second. Guys, I'm doing this once. So follow along quick. All right, so Zamanders. All right, so we have Akbar, and we know that Akbar granted. Right, we know that he granted these land revenues. Right, so this is the right to collect taxes, and of course the way this generally functions is you have, and this is a highly decentralized form of tax collection within these empires. So the right to collect taxes is given off to the local provinces, and and they're responsible for a set amount of money. And as long as they, provide that set amount of money in, then they're fine. If they fall short continually, then they'll be replaced by somebody else. Akbar begins this tradition of granting land revenues to military officers, as well as governmental bureaucrats. Right. In exchange for service. Right, in exchange for service. Right, so, and it's important to note here that this is non-hereditary. So you don't have like a landed aristocracy per se. Other kind of notable facts here is that about 15%, right? 15% were Hindu. And you will see this number decline under Aranza, right? But under Akbar, you're talking about 15%. And these are mostly from the Rajputs. Right? These are mostly from the Rajputs. And you do have some examples of hereditary, mansabs, but kind of focusing in on this non-hereditary thing, because this provides a good similarity comparison with what happens in the Ottomans. All right, so within the Ottomans, something we talked about yesterday. All right, within the Ottomans, you have the tax farmers. Right, you have the tax farmers. Sometimes you'll see it as Timars, right? And especially after the reforms of 1610 that we did on our timeline yesterday, these are going to be land grants, right? Land grants given for military service. Right, and of course, if you feel like you're being overtaxed, you can petition up through the courts. So, all right. So, what would be a good category of analysis for us on these? Maybe government intervention. Right, government intervention innovation. Government innovation in tax collection policies. All right, and I guess if you wanted to throw in a difference comparison here as well, you could actually go to just kind of mix it up a little bit. You could look at the French model. All right, so this France, right? You're talking under Louis XIV, yeah, and So you're gonna see a system put into place called the intendant system. The intendant, yes, there you go. Right, and this right here, centralizes, right, tax collection. Right, so here we have two very decentralized tax collection systems, and in the French case, which I guess we'll look at later, you have a more centralized version being put into place. Right, so be thinking about comparisons, right? Be thinking about comparisons. Let me kind of put that a little bit that you could make with this. All right. So for the last vocab concept from last night, so you all remember this stuff, right? Is the policies of Aurangzeb. Right. So Aurangzeb's policies. All right. So if you want to categorize him, he is kind of a controversial figure within Mughal history. View him as a strict, right? His policies as strict Islamic. Right, strict Islamic reforms, and we see a lot of more conservative Islamic reaction to like Akbar. So we're going to see the implementation of some of these more conservative Islamic policies under Aurangzeb. Right, so under him, we're going to see the reversal. Right, reversal of Akbar's. Right, Akbar's his policies. It's called these accommodation policies. Right, Akbar's accommodation policies. All right, so what does that mean? That means like the jizya. All right, jizya will be reinstated. For a time. All right, jizya will be reinstated, and of course, the religious autonomy. Will be reversed, and we're going to see here prohibitions. Right, prohibitions on a lot of things like alcohol, right, prostitution, dancing at court. Right, those kinds of things. There's also some accusations of persecutions, right? Persecutions of Hindus, forced conversion of Hindus, and allegations that he destroyed Hindu temples. Right? That he destroyed Hindu temples. The accusation out there is that he destroyed thousands of Hindu temples. Reality, maybe a couple dozen. Right? And just to make a comparison, right? Just to make a similarity comparison here, let's do a different one than the Ottomans. Right? Let's do Safavid. Right? Let's do Safavid policies. All right, so what do we know about this? You could say Shah. Use the title Shah when you're talking about the Safavid, right? So Shah Ismail. Okay. Keep in mind he is Shia. Right? Shia Islam here. So we see religious persecution under him. So forced conversion of Sunnis under him. And we also see forced relocation of certain Christian groups. to Isfahan. All right, and I guess specifically we're talking here about Armenians. Armenian merchants. And kind of correct assumption here that, positive or good for the trade contact with people like Venetians and the Genoese in that established Black Sea trade. And I guess kind of as a part of this, we also know that he built Christian, right, or he built a Christian cathedral in Isfahan. So talking about, we should put in here. This is Shah, a later date here, Shah Abbas, right? In that case there. All right. Just a kind of a little last note here. This is not only policies of the Safavids. We know that around the early 1500s that the Ottomans were also persecuting Shia Muslims. And it is said that the Safavid military strengthened. It's strengthened by those who fled persecution. By those who fled persecution. Okay. All right. Category of analysis for this. Category of analysis for this would be religious persecution. All right. To create, and insert your word here, in society. Maybe order, maybe homogeneity, maybe stability. All right. And I guess another example that we have not got to yet, so I'm just going to put this up top. Maybe would be the Tokugawa. The Tokugawa shogunate. And their anti-Christian edicts. And we'll leave that kind of open for a later video. All right. So that is all for today. Once again, there's our monumental architecture. I guess I was going to do some other things, but I think that's probably good enough. All right. Sapriati.